Welcome to Sons of Patriarchy. I'm your host, Peter Bell. Sons of Patriarchy exists to expose the hidden power structures behind Christian nationalism. Through survivor testimonies, shared storytelling, and honest expert critiques from across the political, theological, and cultural spectrums, we shine light on systems of abuse and authoritarian control principally focused on Doug Wilson of Moscow, Idaho, and the movements he has founded and influenced, as well as across Reformed and conservative churches. Our goal is not just to inform, how did we get here, and what do we do about it, but to spark meaningful conversations in homes, faith communities, and public spaces about what a healthier, freer, and more just society can look like. Together, we can dismantle harmful narratives and build communities of mutual respect and diversity. Sons of Patriarchy aims to do what Doug cannot. We will unite people. We do not demand you be like us. We meet you where you are. And while you may not always agree with us, we hope we can agree on this. Churches should be safe. You can find us on all podcasting platforms as well as YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and X, and sonsofpatriarchy.com. Ad-free episodes, bonus content, listening a week ahead of time on both audio and video, monthly Ask Us Anything specials, and many more perks are available across 5 membership levels at patreon.com/Sons of Patriarchy. Much of the same is available via Apple Podcast subscriptions for $4.99 a month. You can give to this work directly at donorbox.com/sons-of-patriarchy. Exclusive Sons of Patriarchy merch is available at sonsofpatriarchy.com/merch. If you'd like to get a hold of us, desire to interview either myself or co-producer Sarah Bader, or you're a news media agency looking for information on Christian nationalism, patriarchy, Doug Wilson, or anything else we covered in the series, go to sonsofpatriarchy.com/contact. Now, on to the episode. Welcome to Christ Church Santa Clarita, Abuse in the CREC, Part 8. In this episode, I speak with an anonymous woman out of concern for protecting a minor child who was a member at Christ Church CREC in Santa Clarita, California, her son, who was anonymous, and 2 witnesses, a former deacon at Christ Church, who will also remain anonymous, and a trauma-informed pastor and counselor, Ray Davis. This is almost a 3-hour-long episode, so we'll get right to it. Let's get to know what happened at Christ Church.
So in 2017, I became a member of Christ Church Santa Clarita. And throughout my attendance, I had no church discipline issues. At first, I reached out to the former pastor of Christ Church, and he encouraged me to stay in the marriage. Then in January 2022, I reached out to the current pastor, who is Andrew Richardson, because my former husband had physically abused me in front of our then 5-year-old daughter. And although it wasn't the first abuse, it was a pretty serious incident. I was scared to call the police out of fear of retaliation. And Richardson did not call the police either, and instead organized a meeting with my ex-husband himself and me, in which my ex-husband showed repentance, at least in front of the pastor. And then Richardson insisted it was time for him to return home. After other abusive incidents continued, and we had met with Richardson each week. That was his suggestion, to meet with weekly marital sessions. And every week I would say, I'm being mistreated, I'm being abused, it's the same. And he even got confirmation of the abuse by asking 2 of the adult children. So things got worse. And there's a recording. So before this incident I'm about to describe, there was this sort of explosive behavior And at one point, I actually recorded it. I actually did that trying to deter the explosive behavior, but it just ended up being a record of it. And so you've heard that, right, Peter? And it was pretty,
Yep,
pretty
we'll
long.
play that during the episode. Yep. We have some big news to share. Sons of Patriarchy will complete its final seasonal episode on January 26th. It's been a wild ride. We cannot express how much every single listener has meant to us, the community of Moscow, and the movement to resist the rise of Christian nationalism, patriarchy, and everything Doug Wilson represents. With that said, we are relaunching as a weekly podcast on February 16th. We are also teaming up with Margaret Bronson of Deconstruction Doulas, who will be co-hosting a brand new weekly series under the Sons of Patriarchy umbrella, They Called Her Bitter, with co-owner, producer Sarah Bader, beginning that same week, February 19th. I, Peter, will host Sons of Patriarchy on Mondays, and Sarah and Margaret will host They Called Her Bitter on Thursdays. Sons of Patriarchy will focus on all things Christian nationalism, patriarchy, and Doug Wilson, as well as an expansion into the areas of red pill ideology, the crisis of masculinity, manosphere and alt-right online and in-person communities, tradwife culture, and more. They Called Her Bitter will focus on stories of abuse and triumph, gathering around those left broken and called bitter by their communities and churches, how to love them in their cults, and how to get them out. This synergy between both podcasts will be our new weekly melody, a symbiotic relationship between Monday deep dives and Thursday raw conversations. We could not be more excited. And just wait until you hear our biggest announcement ever in a month or two. 2026 is going to be incredible. See you soon. Before I play this audio that the anonymous woman gave permission for me to play, I want to warn you about its language. This is the strongest language we have yet played on Sons of Patriarchy. So pause, make sure you're ready, and make sure there's no young kids around you, and then play.
Good. I have peace. I can just sit out here with it on record and you won't blast me.
And no matter what I ever say, I fucking hate you. Deep down inside. So if I tell you I love you, it's bullshit. I'm just trying to manipulate you. Deep down inside in my core, I fucking hate you. You stupid ass fucking cunt bitch. Fuck you and the fucking hole that you came out of. Fuck your family. Fuck your entire bloodline. Fuck this marriage. Fuck our kids. Fuck everything. Fuck our church. Fuck my job. It's all gone. I should punch you in the fucking face, slit your fucking throat, and then cut mine. That's how bad I fucking hate you. We'll be on the fucking paper. Is that what you want? Go ahead, call the cops. Get a fucking restraining order, you dumb bitch.
So anyway, the church just did not take any of this sort of behavior seriously. And then finally, in May of 2022, my ex-husband called 911 and he said he was going to murder me and then kill himself. And there's also a recording of that.
Here is that 911 audio where her ex-husband calls and says he's going to murder her and then kill himself.
Wednesday, May 25, 2022. 10, 0, 2, and 17 seconds.
911, what is your emergency?
I'm about to murder my wife.
Sir? What's the address, sir?
I need to be locked up.
Okay, sir. Where's your wife right now?
She's lying in the bed next to me.
We're gonna get help with you right
take
now,
her
okay,
out,
sir?
and I'm gonna take myself out.
No, sir. Please don't do that, okay? Hold on. We're gonna get you help right now.
Okay, thanks.
At the same time, he failed the drug test that the police and the psychiatric facility organized that happened after that 911 call. So following this event, Richardson and the two other elders, which are Steve Robertson and Aaron Fudge, wanted to discuss a plan to focus on how to repair the marriage, basically. And the focus was on issues such as finance and reading the Bible together, among other things. And there's actually an email that called Game Plan that I had sent to look at. And so that email, it just basically was a plan to stay sober and read the Bible, and that we would, talk about our problems with a financial advisor and have household expectations and read a book on pride and humility, that sort of thing. So as a result of these actions, however, according to the authorities, during June and July 2022, the Sheriff's Department in the area and the Department of Children and Family Services, which is the agency that investigates child abuse in the state, stepped in to investigate abuse from both my ex and his adult daughter toward my 6-year-old daughter. And their advice was that I needed to seek restraining orders immediately and make every effort to protect the 6-year-old daughter so that she was not sent to foster care and put in harm's way and so forth. So I did pursue that and was granted a restraining order against my ex-husband. And since he had parental rights that risked her safety, that was the priority. I did hold off on taking any kind of legal action against the adult daughter of my ex because she did not have parental rights and I had enough going on. Coincidentally, with the awareness that I was taking legal action against her father, the adult stepdaughter returned to regularly attending Christ Church on Sundays at the same time as a non-member. And so at that point, I couldn't bring my own daughter, the young daughter, to church on Sundays without compromising her well-being. I did tell the church elders this early July 2022, explained the situation, but nothing changed on their end. We did have a meeting and I did mention the risks. And one of the things I recall was Andrew Richardson stating that, even if our 6-year-old went to foster care, maybe she'd just get placed with a family member, and it's more important to prioritize the marriage, sort of thing. And that was that really concerned me. On August 10th of 2022, the Department of Children and Family Services actually interviewed Andrew Richardson, and he reported that there were no safety concerns and there was no reason for divorce or separation. And that also has an attachment that I sent, which is a very, very, very edited down and abridged version, but just a very small section there to show, his statement, highly redacted statement, that he indeed thought there was no safety concerns or grounds for divorce. His statements were alarming, and DCFS instructed me to, or encouraged me, I should say, to not take further counsel from Andrew Richardson. And that's, their job wasn't to tell me what to do. It was to protect the child's safety And so while the final decisions were up to me, it was very obvious that my job as a mother was to prioritize my child's safety. So on August 23rd, 2022, Richardson suggested that my ex-husband and his adult daughter should attend the church service alternative Sundays to myself and the 6-year-old. And again, I sent that as an email, an attached email excerpt. And so his statement, please let me know as soon as you hear from DCFS regarding, and then the stepdaughter's name. And he said there could be designated dates for ex-husband and daughter to attend, and dates they would agree to go elsewhere, so that you could go here. And that was his suggestion, was an alternate attendance plan. So however, before I could really pray about this and respond, to behave in more ways that alarmed the authorities. So that never really happened. And it really was removed from the table. Is there was the I think hope was that I would also just find a new church and we could just both of us go away, so they didn't have that situation. And so I don't even though I expressed, hey, like, is there a way to go to service with my young daughter, that never happened. So on September 11th, 2022, after the divorce was filed, Andrew Richardson read a letter in front of the congregation stating that my ex-husband was under church discipline for divorce. And there was, that's also something I've sent to you. And so there was a letter read out loud, a church discipline letter about my ex-husband. And basically it said that the session of Christ Church, having met with and counseled, my ex-husband and myself since January with the goal of helping them live out a God-honoring marriage and family, that my ex-husband filed for divorce and that godly counsel was ignored. The shocking part about this letter is that they never mentioned the violence, the threat on my life, the child abuse investigation, nothing. It was just a letter that really made it sound like we had counsel wrong, and really left out any of the reasons for that, in terms of the safety of everyone in the household. So however, he made no mention of the domestic violence restraining order sent to him, originally ordered in July, and which had now been extended. So that restraining order that was sent to him originally has even now been extended through 2028, over 5 years. And also sent to him were some statements from the 2 adult children about what they had witnessed. And so not the stepdaughter that was being investigated, but the other 2 adult children in the home during the marriage. And so I sent you all 4 of those attachments that I'm referring to. What they are is attachment. One of them is the original restraining order that was ordered on July 7th, 2022, and just spelled out exactly why, like a whole host of events that led to why the judge felt that was a valid restraining order request, and ordered the abusing party to be restrained. And then I also sent the final restraining order, which goes all the way through 2028, that really reiterates the conditions of the temporary restraining order. Both are very serious. And then 2 declarations, so official legal documents that were written under penalty of perjury by each of the two adult children that were just listing out the most horrific examples of abuse by both my ex-husband and one of them. It also talked about abuse by the adult stepdaughter. The other one didn't mention specific examples, but said that she had cut ties with her. And there were examples to include, but I think the paralegal who had worked with them, these declarations were for the restraining order regarding my ex-husband. So that was what was focused on in them. But to be honest, I had no idea until I read these declarations how abusive things were with these poor children. I mean, he threw them downstairs and just knocked one of the poor girl's face into a refrigerator, and to the point that it moved the refrigerator. Just beating on one of them. It was really sad and confronting to see how a lot of what happened to them had happened. And I, like, one of them was for a period, like every event described pretty much occurred during a period where my ex-husband and I were separated. And I just had no idea that during that separation period where he was not able to hurt me physically, to abuse me, he was basically taking it out on his own daughters, including the one who had become abusive and then abused her younger sister, my daughter that was the protected child in the DCFS situation. So, he abused his daughter, and then she learned it and continued the pattern. So sad. So it's hard to talk about. So anyway, so this, unfortunately, while those documents I just described were all sent to the church session and the story was told to them, I don't want to say story, but the facts of the case were told to them. There was obvious documentation. Even one of the deacons had been involved in the situation, and he even witnessed some things. A pastor from another church had witnessed some things. I mean, they had heard so much and they knew all of this. And yet the letter that was read in front of the entire congregation was, this person filed for divorce, and that's the issue. The divorce, we gave them good counsel, that didn't get followed. And that was very, very misleading. So that led many church members to believe that there was no abuse, and that really adversely impacted support for my children and myself. Then on September 13th, 2022, just 2 days later, Andrew Richardson sent me an email saying that he spoke with a DCFS social worker and that there was no issue with contact between the minor child and the adult step. And so I also included that attachment. He said that he talked to her. He says, I did indeed speak with the caseworker from DCFS, and DCFS has no recommendation, and something about a private therapist. So I thought that was really surprising based on what I knew DCFS was recommending. So I did talk to the social worker about the email and actually I forwarded her the email. She was really shocked and said that did not state or reflect her position at all. And there was an expectation and a DCFS recommendation based on their investigation that I keep my child protected and that I have a responsibility to protect her from harm and even fear of harm from both her father and her older sister who had mistreated her, who had abused her. Yeah, just completely misleading. So then the social worker actually at that point, we had an upcoming meeting called the Child and Family Team meeting, I think, or safety meeting. I can't remember the exact phrase there, but we had a meeting, and it was a meeting that originally I there was even some discussion about Andrew Richardson coming to that meeting as a way to kind of help him with some authorities in place to see what was really going on and be more supportive and more realistic about the safety issues. And but after the social worker read the email I forwarded her from Andrew that denied her recommendations, she felt that was not appropriate, and left it up to me, which is how DCF works, but strongly recommended that I think through about who was safe and who was not. And just to clarify, the way that child abuse investigation works is it's completely focused on what's safe for the child. So they don't tell the parents what to do, but if the parents make decisions that are not safe for that child, then they will remove that child to foster care, or they will press charges against that parent, like failure to protect. Anyway, so we had this meeting. The DCFS put in writing during that meeting what their very specific recommendations were concerning safety and not be re-traumatized, and recommendation of no contact with, and then their names. So I did send that to the elders. However, the elders maintained that everybody was welcome to attend church together, and that was what they were proposing. So there's a real disconnect between what was happening. So after continued concerns with how the abuse issues were constantly being covered up, in February of 2023, I decided to reach out to the Communion of Reformed Evangelical Churches Presbytery Leader Authority for help. And that was a man by the name of John Stuess. What's really interesting about this is I decided to come forward about my story because I was listening to this podcast, and another family, the Reynolds family, mentioned their interactions with John Stuess. And they had a situation where they did not get in line with what their church authority was expecting of them. And they reached out to John Stuess, and he basically told them to find a new church and let it go. And that's exactly what I was told, almost identical. And that was so similar, what they experienced and what I experienced, that it was part of why I decided to come forward, because I started to realize that this is a pattern. This is something built into the denomination, and this is scary stuff. So anyway, so John Stuess never took my call, but instead contacted Richardson and emailed to say he would not assist or call me, and referencing that the church already made an announcement about the church discipline in the divorce, and suggested I find a new church. And I also sent that letter that, he says, if you're unhappy with the way your elders have dealt with the situation, I recommend you seek a church where you are comfortable submitting to the authority of the church leadership, and that he considers the matter closed. So after this interaction with the presbytery leader, and I really still didn't want to leave a community in which I was connected, and I wanted to believe the best about everyone. I really thought that, these are people who really want the best for me, and they just didn't understand because, maybe they just didn't have the right education, but they were good-hearted people. And, I thought that I needed to submit to the church leadership in the sense of just being quiet and attending in not Sunday, obviously, but the other times, and just wait until the DCFS case, which was confidential and I couldn't really go into details with, especially while it was happening. So I had to wait till that case concluded and a public court order was available. to bring up any more concerns to the Christ Church elders. So I thought that the issue was just more proof was needed. So that's how it went for a while. I just kept going quietly to church. And then in May of 2023, we had a dependency court hearing. That's the type of court that handles the child abuse cases. And they formally ruled a no contact order against the adult daughter of my ex-husband, who was my stepdaughter. I also sent a heavily redacted version of that, which just simply states court orders a stay away order between and then the two parties. So I didn't actually send that right away. I decided to take the time to focus on, my daughter's safety in terms of just the other stuff going on beyond the church. Then finally, in July of 2023, the dependency court issued a very strongly protective custody order for our daughter regarding my ex-husband. So, and included in that protective custody order was a no contact order and stay away order against the adult daughter of my ex. And I sent that through. It says, and this is a public document, older stepsister so-and-so is ordered to stay away and have no contact with minor. And then it also says minor has also reported more than 20 incidents of witnessing domestic violence and or being hurt by father and stepsister, and then the names. So very clear in there. So I sent this information to the church leadership or session in an email stating that I hoped and had intention to return to the Sunday service. And my understanding was always had been that, at first it was, we can go on a schedule, and we just need some more proof, or we just need stronger proof. So I thought, well, surely this is enough. And even if not, I mean, the adult stepdaughter was aware of these orders and surely wasn't going to undermine them, was my thinking at the time. But this is where I made a mistake. I thought that I could attend the Sunday service and leave the legal situation up to the legal authorities, and that the adult daughter would obey the law by refraining from attending the church while we were there, and that the elders would also respect the court order. And I actually even had been told by other members that she had laid low and wasn't attending after the dependency court issued the original no contact order against her, because she knew that I could go. And so but that's not what happened. What I realized on that Sunday morning when I attempted to attend Christ Church is that the leaders had actually gone out of their way to make sure she would attend church that day. So letting them know about the court order sort of somehow led to some things happening on their part to, in a sense, tell her that, no, she's welcome, she can come, she doesn't have to follow that, even though there was behavior on her part before that she was gonna hang back and not be that bold. But this was evident in boldness in attending church, in contrast to what she had been observed to do in the prior weeks, and denial. She pretended that she did not know about the court order, even though she was present at the courthouse when the original no contact order was issued, and then follow up. As for my part in things, I took my children from the church service moments after it was clear that she was going to be there, and I waited in a private location while I contacted the sheriff, which was my responsibility as the parent. And then I met with the police off church grounds, and after service ended, to make a police report. So So that was what happened on the day of. And then after that, but before I had met with the church leadership, so that was a very difficult day. A couple days later, I got a text basically saying I was no longer welcome at any church events until I met with the session. And before I met with the session, Richardson made an announcement to the entire congregation that some, without naming names, were under church discipline, alluding to details of my personal situation. And it made it pretty clear to everyone that I was under church discipline because I was contacted by some members about that. Then I was sent a letter in August of 2023 by the elders that said I was not welcome to attend any church events until I fully repented of my actions. And I've included all these things, these two main things I just described, the email that I sent the church leadership, as well as the letter that they sent me. In my letter, it just basically went over, a sort of a summary of what happened. I sent them some of the public court documents and, what I could to, explain the situation. I had said, regarding the no contact, that I had told them about DCFS recommending regarding my young daughter and the adult daughter that had hurt her. They had communicated that they would follow a court order and the law when it comes to child safety. So I attached the 2 dependency court orders for them, and that I said I intend to resume the attendance with my family. And it is my hope that you will let her know, as you did with my ex, of our intent to attend service. And I even put in there, I was personally hopeful for some sort of peace process, reconciliation process in the future. But obviously one that acknowledged what was really going on. And so I got put under church discipline, though, because I tried to go to church. And basically it says that, on the date I went to church, I acted in direct defiance of my vows, and that I worked with other people from having her attend worship in my statement of intent. Because during that day, I had actually mentioned to one of the pastors that, I, was hoping to go to the service, and that I did have to follow the law. And he did say that, their position is, well, everyone's welcome. Everyone's welcome. So I didn't realize that. So anyway, in this letter, it says I acted in direct defiance of my vows, and that I was, keeping this person from attending worship, and that I worked against them. And I was being called to repentance by submitting to the leadership, making a public apology, and that I actively that I not tell anybody at church about any of these issues that had happened, and that I start basically reconciling with the stepdaughter, who at this point did not acknowledge that she did anything, which is part of why she had a no contact order in the first place. So that was their response, was, you can't come to church anymore unless you do this list of things, which was absolutely impossible for me to legally do. So that was very eye-opening, and that was very shattering. So I was sent a letter in August 2023. I met with the elders, apologized for mistakenly thinking I could attend church, and agreed that I would not attend events against their restrictions. However, I strongly disagreed with their actions and account of things, and stressed that I thought that their treatment of me was severe, cruel, and misplaced. And that's when I started to realize that, there was everyone is not welcome. Anyway, in December of that same year, my ex-husband was interestingly welcomed back to Christ Church to attend a wedding, and she was actually the wedding of the daughter that wrote the declaration about how much he was beating her up. And but she had stayed at Christ Church, and somehow that was so she stayed at the church and was counseled by the elders, I think, to welcome him back into her life. So she did. And she is either pregnant or having a child, and she's moved to a foreign country with her new husband. So, then so that I at that point, I kind of just tried to move on with my life and realized that, I wasn't welcome, and there wasn't really a way forward. So then in August of 2024, I received a second letter from the leadership of Christ Church Santa Clarita that misstated the situation entirely. And this was a real shock to me. It said that, in the last meeting, I apologized for breaking my vows of being defiant, which is not true. I apologize for really misunderstanding and any sort of disrespect, but I certainly, and it said that while the session accepted my apology and reconciliation occurred, we together came to the conclusion that I was no longer to attend Christ Church, and I was encouraged to find a new church. And that's not true. Reconciliation did not occur. And I was basically barred, excommunicated. So they said that according to the bylaws, which the bylaws have this covenant disagreement, yet maintaining fellowship, that the bylaws said there's a substantial difference of doctrine or practice which have been worked through, and that fellowship is maintained even though disagreements exist, but that sort of gives them grounds to send me to a different church. So that's what they said they were going to do, but I absolutely disagreed with their account of things. It was actually one of the most shocking letters I received, that their way of reframing everything, just absolutely sweeping everything that happened under the rug. And so I sent them a response just so I had it, for the record. And I CC'd a pastor who had been a witness at some of the meetings I had with them. So I said that it is not true that I apologize for acting in defiance. I told them that I did not agree, that I was quote unquote working against the peace of the church, and clarified that I called the police after church and off campus, and reconciliation absolutely did not occur, that it is not true that we came to the conclusion together that I was no longer able to continue attending. And instead, I was effectively excommunicated and forcibly excluded from all church events because I was trying to do the right and protective thing by my abused child, who was also excommunicated. And that was just, even to think about that they would make this things up when really what they were doing was excommunicating a child. So they stated that I was not welcomed at the Sunday service and not welcomed at any parish group, evening song service, or other events that were far beyond any of the events that my adult stepdaughter went to. So that, like a full excommunication. And I had consistently been at actually all of those events for a while before I was barred from everything. So I wrote them a response saying that I was being alienated from the body of believers, and that I do not think they were using the reference bylaws appropriately, because we didn't have a substantial difference of doctrine or practice, except in the sense of sweeping the abuse under the rug. And nothing was worked through. And what I stated, and I stand by, is that they used their power as church leaders to alienate me from the congregation, and that I had no say in the matter, and that fellowship was not maintained. In fact, the public announcement about my situation before I met with church leadership even though it was a vague announcement, it further alienated me. And that my children and I were absolutely alienated and excommunicated from the entire congregation. So I did not agree to this voluntary find a new church plan, in the fact that that's just not what happened. So that is my story. In reflecting on what happened, it's now clear to me that the Christ Church leaders worked to cover up abuse and silence me, my abused child, and any other victims or witnesses that came forward, including one of their deacons that was severely mistreated for trying to speak the truth. I am aware that this is not the only case like this at that church, but it is up to the others to tell their stories. And that's mine. So there you go.
So first question, how were you first introduced to Christ Church CREC in Santa Clarita?
So I first went as the guest of a family of a young boy who my son was on a sports team with. And the family had first taken my son to some events with them. And then we basically all started going after that. And the family was on church leadership, which at the time did not really mean much to me. They were actually related to the head pastor. And it was similar to how the Christ Church in Moscow is, in which a lot of the people on the leadership are in the same family. At the time, I didn't notice that was a thing.
Question 2, what was the culture like at this church? You've answered, or you've talked about some of the facts of this case, but just in general, what was it like walking around there, the men there, women there, session there? What was the culture like at this church?
Okay. So, like a lot of the others on the podcast have stated, it at first came across as very robust and seemed to have lots of opportunities to be part of a very close community. At the beginning, I was very excited about being part of something very lively. And in retrospect, though, I can actually see parallels between the way that an abusive spouse is very charming at first and how Christ Church is very welcoming at first. It's like a conditional relationship. So like the abusive spouse, the initial experiences are eventually replaced by a more controlling atmosphere in which you can't disagree with the authority, and any serious objections to the power structure are basically a problem and disciplined. So I can now see that this is a place in which the leadership or the session cannot be questioned. In the Christ Church Santa Clarita, the leadership had, in a sense, taken the seat of God in this very extreme and dangerous way. And specifically, the session had this tendency to glorify masculinity as having to do with like smoking cigars and drinking and this sort of return to primitive manhood. And it's very consistent with what a lot of people across the CRECs have also said is happening. For the women, it was about serving your husbands and these, crafts or homemaker activities. Now, for a household in which everyone is treating each other with respect and as part of common decency, I imagine that this model would work at least initially. But I don't think it was really a Christian community in the sense that there was no way to address those who abuse their roles within the family structure, especially husbands, as needing to actually change their ways and realistically repair the situation. It was more about sweeping things under the rug and, maybe doing some marital counseling sessions to keep on track and just showing up at the monthly potlucks and the liturgy of the church and the other social events. But there wasn't really a space where there was a lot of depth or things were really unpacked or dealt with, or any serious things could be healed through or worked through. So yeah.
All right, and then the meaty question, well, this will cross over with some of the things from the first email, but I think this is good to see where a lot of these threads linked, and even not that it's not factual, but this is more sharing your story and your experience. So when did you first start questioning what was happening to you and to your kids and how the elders or the church leaders were responding to what was happening and your questioning about what was happening.
So for me, because I was in a very abusive marriage that started before going to Christ Church, it took me a while to realize what was happening. Sadly, I had gotten used to abuse and accepted the authority of the elders at times when I can now see I should have definitely objected. With the current pastor, Andrew Richardson, the first time I became alarmed was after the incident in which my ex-husband threw me down and held me down in front of our daughter. And days later, got angry and broke our front door quite severely. Um, so I told the pastor I was too scared to call the police and also too scared for him to return home. And while the pastor did seem supportive and he organized a meeting where we were living at the time because we had to stay outside the house because of a house repair issue. Yeah, so Pastor Richardson had assured me he would not undermine my safety during this meeting. But at the meeting, my ex-husband said he repented. And so the pastor pressured me in front of my ex to welcome him back. And then at that point, he initiated the weekly marriage counseling sessions. I remember feeling really terrified in that moment, but really confused, as if what I thought was happening wasn't really that bad. On one hand, I'm experiencing these really violent episodes and really scared that I have no way out. And on the other hand, I just want to believe that it's not that bad for my own survival, for the survival of the family, because I don't see how to get out of this. And one thing that isn't really specific to Christ Church, but is something that happens to victims of abuse, is just in this state, in this country, the standard for when there is violence to remove and protect the children is actually really, really high. And so unless there's really obvious signs of abuse, it can very easily become a he said, she said situation. And in my case, my ex-husband was so manipulative and good at persuading people that even when I had tried to make attempts to get out of the situation, it was really hard to be believed. It was really hard to see that there was a way to get out with my children safely. And so, and that was my real need at the time, I can see in retrospect, was for the church authority to kind of come in with an exit strategy, and maybe really getting some serious accountability and help for my ex-husband before things had really spiraled. But yeah, I remember feeling, that the situation was really scary. And yet I would tell the pastor what was going on. And, he thought it was fine to continue on with the marriage with just marital counseling. And it gave me the sense that, maybe I misunderstood how bad it was. Maybe it wasn't that bad. And so a lot of normalizing had happened for me through just not really feeling like I'd leave, not really feeling like anyone, heard what was happening to me or acknowledging it. So I questioned the pastor to my friend, who was also his relative, the one who had brought me to the church to begin with. And she encouraged me also to submit to his leadership. So at that time, I did, because I thought, that would solve it, hopefully at some point. I think it was some wishful thinking. And also she was a really involved friend, and I had trusted her counsel. So that's when I first started to question it. And then for many months, we had that time where we were meeting weekly for the marriage counseling. It was very short, like 30 minutes at the most a week. And every week I would say that the situation was not changed and there was continued episodes and continued issues. And I think in terms of those two audios that I've provided, it was the explosive behavior. It was the, the expletives and the I hate you and just these blow ups where I was in this role of having to, in a sense, talk my ex-husband off the cliff. And the Christ Church leadership's position is, was at the time like to submit and to not provoke and to do my part to help him feel calm. And so I just took it as, let him, have his blow ups and then try to help him to calm back down. So that just went on and on until the incident in which my ex-husband had threatened to murder me to 911. And that was different. That felt really different. That felt very real. And I started to really feel scared for my life at that point, because when that happened, he was so calm and comfortable. And what isn't in the audio is that he was like staring at me as he was talking to the 911 operator and really wanting me to know how much he meant it. And I started to realize at that point that if I continued to stay in this marriage, that I could end up dead. The explosive threats that he wants to kill me had turned into this more determined, calm issue. And that with the violence, it was a really unsafe situation. So that incident where there was an involuntary mental health hold and a police investigation, child protective services were investigated, and I was so scared things would escalate. That was the turning point. That was when I realized I couldn't listen to the Christ Church leadership anymore. And at that point, I cried out to God in a very deep, repentant way and asking God to protect my children. And at that moment, like literally a minute later, probably less than a minute, the phone rang, and it was a detective who was investigating the situation. And from there, the investigation got going and more focused on protection and child safety, and more authorities got involved. And at this point, a split occurred, in which I listened to the police and the Children's Protection Services and did not really listen to the pastor and the other church leaders when they were in conflict with regard to advice and safety. And so I tried to believe the best about the leadership, figuring that they would see what was really going on in time. But I could also feel their resentment toward me growing as I questioned and distanced myself from their authority. And like, I specifically remember a conversation early on in which one of the deacons, who I think you're also going to talk to, he was present between the head pastor, Andrew Richardson, and myself, in which after many years of my being a church member and with my kids plugged in, he said that maybe it was best if my ex-husband and I just stopped going to that church, and that he wanted, in other words, he wanted us to kind of go away. And since he couldn't quite sweep it all under the rug, and that was very disheartening. And that's when I started to realize there was a real problem here. But I didn't want to believe it. I really wanted to make it work, kind of like I did in the marriage. I think I already talked about it, but after my ex-husband officially filed the divorce paperwork in response to the restraining order paperwork that I had filed, the leadership read out that public letter, but it didn't mention the domestic abuse. And that was really concerning me as well. That was a experience that was a huge red flag. And of course, when DCFS would say one thing about safety, and then the leadership continued to pretend they were not saying that and come up with their own view of it, or seeing Andrew's Richardson's statement in to DCFS, it was just those things were really shocking, to see that so much could happen. I mean, they heard those audios. They were told a lot. They saw the declarations of the older children who had been badly abused, and it just was never enough for the situation to be taken seriously or even really acknowledged in any kind of meaningful way. So I think that in their view, they felt like, of course we were there. We were supporting you. We were praying for you and this and that. But some things I want to mention is from the time I filed the restraining order, and that was ordered by the court, I can count on one hand the times that the church leadership really reached out to see how I was doing. And especially without me contacting them. And, you know, I couldn't go to Sunday service, and not once did anyone think to, you know, we're going to come to your house and bring you communion, or, you know, maybe, or maybe our wife is going to come to your house and sit with you, and you could watch it online and be a part of the community that way. Like, there was no movement that they could have easily taken, even with all those things, even if they weren't going to have me there on Sundays, to help me to be a part of the community. So when I look back at all that, it's really obvious that that there was a divide on their part when I didn't listen to their authority about, you know, kind of continuing to sweep everything under the rug and do all the marriage counseling. Like, when I moved away from that, I think they really moved away from wanting to support or be a part of my life and wanting to me to even be at the church. And I think the writing was on the wall for the eventual excommunication. So yes. So the question, how I was treated by the elders and pastors when I was raising the questions, is I think the more I questioned, the more they shunned me, like whether it was an unofficial shunning or more serious. So I had been in the community a long time, and I was hopeful to make things work, but other issues had happened. I had had some health issues preventing me from being in events, and everything that had been uncovered by both my ex-husband and his adult daughter, hurting the young daughter, because she was terrified of both of them, understandably. So there's so much going on. And then also, I think, so another thing that was going on was this adult daughter who had basically trashed the church to us privately in our home before everything happened with that 911 phone call. You know, she'd make fun of the teens for being sheltered and ignorant, and pretty much say the same thing about the adults. So, but even though originally she had been trashing the church, she used the circumstance of, you know, the investigation and DCFS to press into the church community and stir up a lot of trouble on behalf of my ex. She even got a job at my former banking institution the same week that my ex-husband tried to file court papers requesting over $100,000 from me. So there's a lot of chaos going on with just, I had some health things, and I'm dealing with all the stuff from DCFS, and then this adult stepdaughter, and, you know, what she was doing. And I was not really that present at Christ Church. So I was still a member and I was still hopeful, but the doubts were growing, and I was seeing more and more red flags. And basically it seemed like as long as I showed up and smiling and seeming like everything was fine at home, even if it was totally dangerous, everyone was happy for me to be a part of Christ Church. But I was not welcome if me being there meant acknowledging the reality of what was going on in the household. It was sort of a conditional fake welcome. And maybe it's because I had been so used to the abuse from my ex. But even for many more months, over a full year from when my ex-husband called 911, I really thought the leadership would come around and acknowledge what had actually happened. But this naivety was just something I didn't realize was so much of a problem until I did. So, and so in response to how the church responded to outside authorities investigating what was happening, they felt they were above that authority. The way they saw it, and I at the time it was very messy and confusing. But basically they would say, oh yes, we're going to follow the law, but their kind of fundamental view was that they were following God and therefore they were the ultimate authority. And I remember one time Andrew Richardson said that let's hope that DCFS got this right. And that was very telling, that he was alluding to his belief that sometimes, in his view, the authorities get it wrong, and really there is nothing, and so maybe there was no abuse, and this was very difficult for me. So their response was to kind of think that maybe they knew better than the authorities, but not wanting to say it so directly. And obviously, they while they did say they followed the restraining order, that's not even, that wasn't true. So for the first month, yes, they followed the restraining order because I think they thought they had to. I truly think that's the only real reason they were willing to do that. But really quickly, they, wanted me to go every other week to the church service. So that's not following the restraining order, really. If he hadn't stopped being a member, I think that there would have been a lot of expectation on me to find a way to have us all at church together. And I think their solution was, no matter what is going on with all these authorities, that, everyone's welcome at church and you should all sit in the pew and be a happy family. And as long as you keep showing up and doing that, everything else will be fine. So very different view than the amount of, I think from the authorities' point of view, there needed to be some counseling and some support and some basic safety protections in place. Okay, so, and then the question about, and how did I finally get out? So in the summer of 2023, the dependency court, after they issued the no contact and stay away order against the adult daughter who had mistreated her little sister who had abused her. So many times before this, the leadership had said they would respect the DCFS recommendations and orders, but actually that was the opposite of what had happened. So on the contrary, when I went to church with that order in place, figuring that it would be followed, I got in trouble. And because I called the police to report the infraction, which was indeed a reportable offense that I needed to report. That's why the police made a police report when I called them. That's why they came. So, and keeping in mind that I had to go through children's court as the mother in this situation, that I was involved in this very controlling, is the way they saw it, very intense religious institution, and under their religious authority, and that psychologically that put me in a position where, by my desire to try to do what was right by the religious authorities, and that I had developed like a psychological inability to protect. If I continued to put a minor child in risks and where she didn't feel safe or she was not safe, then that is failure to protect. So yes, I met the police off grounds. And it wasn't actually their church. I do want to mention this. They are renting the church from the SDA, which is the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And but they still felt like during that time that they're having the church and renting that time to be in the building for their service, that they are the authority in that SDA space. So I did not go on the SDA grounds. I waited till church ended and off grounds. So, but in the sessions view and the leadership's view, I needed to be banned from all church activities from that point on. And they even, and even with that vague announcement, that I had sinned without naming names. So being put under church discipline for trying to protect my child, even being told I had to apologize publicly, it was just so extreme. And even that was not enough. There was all these weird conditions about a forced reconciliation with somebody who had abused my child, who was denying that. These things were so extreme that it became absolutely obvious that there was no decision, there was no desire for me to, on their part, to have me there. So I know their rhetoric was, "Oh, you're welcome, everyone's welcome," but it was a conditional welcome. It was if you do what we say, if you look through the world with these denial colored glasses that we have, then we will accept you. But that's it. If you try to bring up, these problems, if you try to bring up what happened in your home, and especially if you talk to other people about that, and especially if you say that, we're not doing our part, especially if you don't follow our authority, like, we will make sure you are gone. So, so the session tried to spin it to other people who reached out to me, even like other members of the church were told that I just decided to go to a different church and then it was best. And it was just some family tension stemming from the divorce, and everything was just being swept under the rug as long as I couldn't be there. So I can see in retrospect that as soon as I rejected the advice of the session to submit to an abusive husband, as soon as the summer of 2022, pretty quickly after that 911 call, the groundwork for the rest was set. And I no longer fit there from that time on, from June of 2022, and my decision to follow the authorities and protect my child and listen to the police, even if it meant conflict with the session of Christ Church. As soon as I went that direction, that was the beginning of the end. And I can see that in retrospect. So I no longer fit there. I no longer represented the fake smiling, pew-filling vision that they had expected. And I think they hoped that I would go with a little nudging, a little shunning, a little hinting. And when that did not work, a little more rejection and even cruelty to my child, just making no accommodations for her, never checking in on us. And in the end, because I really tried to believe the best about them, they were willing to straight up ban me from church through this sort of weird version of excommunication to cover it all up and save face. So how I finally got out was, I got out because I got kicked out because I did not know how bad they actually were treating me. I'd gotten so used to it that I thought it was me. I thought if I just adjusted, I thought just enough more evidence, surely they would change, which sounds a whole lot like a battered wife. So, but I can definitely say that in the end, I'm so glad. I'm so glad it happened that way. I'm so glad I'm no longer there, because I think knowing what my children have been through, knowing what I have been through, I cannot think of a worse environment to normalize abuse and assure that my children will go straight into abusive futures than staying in a church like that. And I'm so glad that it happened the way it did.
All right. So last question. And you're going to add another part to this, so feel free to say what part you're adding to it. If you can talk to those who might be interested in joining a CREC church, those who are still in these churches and they, like you, are wondering, maybe this is happening to me. And then add the one more group that you wanted to add to this as well.
So to those who might be interested in joining a CRE church, I simply say run. It's not what you think, and do not get sucked in. Just run. Go find somewhere else. For the question about those who are in the CREC churches and they might think this is happening to them, I would say walk away very, very carefully, and just know that there will be resistance and retaliation, and be wise and safe and careful and anticipate that, because it's hard to extrapolate yourself from a situation that's so awful without wounds and harm. And I really want to specifically say this. In my situation, which was really a horribly abusive situation, but on the record, things were bad enough where the authorities kind of got involved and took over. And as a result of that, being so extreme, I was sort of put in a position where it was more obvious that it was in my best interest to not listen to the Christ Church leadership about child custody issues and decisions concerning my children. And so I am so thankful in a way that it happened that way, because now I have a strong protective order in place. And now my children are not in a school or church environment where they're being misled about their own experiences and so forth, or just about the Bible itself. And now my children are safe in their homes. They're not left alone with an abusive parent who could do awful things to them. But when I've listened to a lot of these other people who've spoken in this podcast before me, one of the things that just breaks my heart, probably the thing that hurts the most, is that it seems like a lot of people, much like myself, are in these churches and they like the robustness. They have been there a while. Maybe for some people, they grew up in it, and it's kind of become normal. And by the time they figure out of what's happening to them and they want out, or they want out of the marriage to an abusive person, it's really hard to get out. And one of the things I've noticed is that without recognizing how bad the church leadership really is in the CREC and how much they work to cover up abuse, I've heard a number of stories on this podcast where women are agreeing to these seemingly amicable custody agreements, or agreements where their children will go to a CREC school. And then they think they're doing the right thing. They think they're being peacemakers, but actually they're being manipulated. And then, a little while later, their children are being heavily encouraged to turn on them, or to, maybe another custody order is going to be requested by the abusive spouse to get them full time, or so forth. And so I think that's one thing I really wanted to speak to. If you're in one of these churches and you think this might be happening to you, and you're in an abusive situation with a spouse, be very wise about custody, and get the help of a domestic violence aware attorney who can help you to make the best and safest decisions for your child, because it's not helpful to try to appease somebody. And I know it seems like it might be okay. And I've been there, because before things got as bad as they did, I did the same kinds of things and tried to make these appeasing decisions. But sending your kids to a school where there's so much hidden abuse and there's so many issues and there's all these things being swept under the rug, and that's not going to help them, especially if they've been dealing with things in the home. So again, make very wise, safe, and careful choices, and especially do not make a custody agreement with a formerly abusive spouse while under the influence of the CREC in any way. But then this third category is people who are just sort of in the CREC and think everything's fine. And that's the group I wanted to speak to as well. If you are in a CREC where these patterns are happening, that's not a Christian church that's honoring Jesus. It's actually worshiping like more of a party atmosphere, like this bread and circuses thing, which is a reference to Roman culture, where they would use feasting and entertainment to control the population, similar to these parish groups or these monthly potlucks and the robust culture and the cigars and the which is, there's nothing wrong with a really robust and healthy community, but if the healthy community is there to kind of get people to cover up stuff, that's a big problem, and that is not following Christianity. And those who really need Jesus most are being harmed and shunned by imposter churches who don't have any room to deal with these real issues. So if you're in a church that's a CREC, probably some of these things are happening, and I would suggest, for your own good, leave. And for the good of the community of saints, leave, because you cannot do God's work if you're behaving in this way, or even staying silent while others behave in this way just for the sake of ease and towing the line. I know that the monthly potlucks are fun. I know that if a person has a business, it is greatly beneficial to be on good terms with the CREC, and could be very detrimental to leave the CREC for the business. And I know that the liturgy feels robust and special. And I know that this feeling that the church is, really strong compared to others is good. But at the end of the day, you cannot say you're walking with Jesus if the priority is to be more important than other people, or to shun those who are in vulnerable positions when they require too much of the church leadership. And you might think that you're going along and not harming anyone, but if you're in a church like this and you know some of this is going on, and you just stay. It's being part of the cover up. Because children and abuse victims, they're getting hurt.
We move from the woman this story revolves around to her son. Let's get to know him and what happened from his perspective.
Yeah, so I was on a cross-country team in middle school, and there was some friends I made on that team, and their families went to Christ Church, and so they invited me to come to church with them. And I started attending church regularly. It started with a Wednesday night service, started moving on to Sunday services. And I originally was going there just myself, while my mom went to a different church. And so my mom decided that she would prefer to come with me to Christ Church, and that's how I started attending.
Gotcha. So when you first started going there, I remember when I was younger, it's like you're kind of going there because your friends go there, like you said. But what was it like first going there? This is not later on when everything happened, but first coming to Christ Church, what was the culture like? What were the people like? What was the vibe like at Christ Church? All those questions.
Yeah, so when I first got there, I think in general, it feels very welcoming. The families there try to go out of their way to welcome you, and invite you to their houses for dinner and meals, especially after church on Sundays. There's church groups they try to get you to join, youth activities. They're trying lots of events. There's a lot going on that you're invited to participate in, and it feels very welcoming. It feels very different too. I remember I hadn't seen a church service officiated by someone in robes before, and so that liturgy also is very unique feeling. And so there's a culture of being different, a different kind of Christian, and a lot of hospitality, a lot of going out of their way to welcome you and make you feel welcome.
What was it like compared to the church that you guys had gone before? Because I mean, both culturally, and then we'll get more into this culture specifically. There's there's a there's a sort of an unstated understanding that in order to reach the younger generation, you kind of have to be. I mean, like, it's not going to make sense today. These words would be laughed at by people your age, but it's like you got to be hip, you got to be cool, like you gotta like do some crazy stuff up front to get people's attention because everyone's on TikTok or everyone's on Instagram. But coming from your guys' background and from your perspective, what was it like switching from your previous church into this church, knowing kind of how churches try to attract people like you?
Yeah. So the number one thing is that they don't change themselves to attract us, attract people. They stick with their liturgy. They wear their robes. They have their hymns they sing. They play an organ. They don't try to be hip and cool. They try to be different. And they say that they mention that God calls Christians to be different, and to be unique and set apart, and so they bring that up a lot about being set apart. But the way they attract people is, instead of tailoring your service to attract young people, they tailor their schedule. So they have lots of events that would be interesting to young people, and just inviting people into their homes. So when I first went there wasn't a single Sunday where I didn't have families, usually several, inviting me to come to their house for lunch. Um, and once I went there longer, I learned that the leadership had a spreadsheet where they kept track of who was inviting who to their house to make sure that everybody who was new
Really?
was,
Huh.
everybody who was new was inviting people to their house. And so they went out of their way to make sure that the leadership and the established families were taking turns inviting people over to their house and having people over there for lunch on Sundays.
Yeah, that's both, I'll say, kind of nice because the church is trying to be intentional about families being really welcoming and hospitable, but it could also be nefarious. It's like, why do you have all this information on all these people? That, like, did you ever, like, when you had heard this, I don't know if this is after or at this time, what were your thoughts on, like, just how closely they monitor some of these things?
So that was kind of when it started to realize how it felt strange, because the longer you're there, if you're not like, it's kind of there's this famous story about how if you boil a frog in water by starting with cold water, the frog won't notice. And so I caught on eventually that certain things were strange, like you said. It was a little strange. It can be welcoming, but strange to keep track of who's going to your house and making sure that everybody's being invited. Like, maybe no one get left out, but then do you notice that some people are always being invited over to other people's houses, and that makes it realize how much more intentional it is. So it makes the clickiness and the circles that form so much more intentional, because that's planned. They plan it out. They go out of their way to have certain families hang out with other families and be that close. And it's one of those things where there's also a culture that you won't notice it. Um, you may never even notice it, but there's definitely a culture of alcoholism, I would say, especially at this church. And so you don't notice it. As a kid, it's really hard to notice it unless you've been around alcoholism. Knowing my situation, I had been around substance abuse with my ex-stepdad.
Yep.
And so I was familiar with what that looked like. And so it was a little shocking to see people needing to drink alcohol at social functions. And there was a men's Bible study that you had to be 16 years old to join. And it's called Calvin on Tap. And normally it's like, oh, it's fun. They're getting together, smoking cigars and pipes and drinking whiskey and all sorts of stuff. And that seems innocuous, but definitely on Sunday afternoons, there was an issue of excess, and there was also the frequency, right? Because alcoholism is both the amount you're drinking and also how frequently you drink it. And I think that's the thing that there's a culture of alcoholism, and I have seen people my age growing up in that culture develop uh very, very not severe, right? Very much you can function normally, but there's somewhat of a dependence there and a need to drink in social situations, right? Every social situation is an excuse to drink, and so that's something I would like let people know, want people to know about, is that there is that sort of culture of alcohol specifically.
Yeah. So you've already touched on this now, and so we'll dive into this a little bit deeper about some of the things you started noticing that were questionable because it sounded great. I mean, that's what we hear from every single story on this series. The front end is incredible. The community is incredible. And we don't want to do is we don't want people to question their community and say, when's it going to turn bad? But it's like, why is there community here? Is it to get people to a certain point, or is it just to be nice people and to be welcoming? And some of these situations, it seems to be like they're finding who are the like that not like influencers is the wrong word, but those who are influential in the community, or those who have the network in the community, or those who can be more easily manipulated within the community, whatever it may be. So we've heard from your mom about when she started questioning things, and so I want to hear from you about when you started questioning things, but also touching on what you saw happening to your mom and what you saw happening to your family as well.
Yes. So I for me, it was a slower kind of burn in terms of the questioning things. Um, the current head pastor, Andrew Richardson, I had some reservations and gotten kind of an off vibe from him for within like a year of going there. I just noticed that he bought way more into the preferential treatment and playing favorites, and and like you mentioned, this community is great, but it's very intentional. All the community aspects are very intentional, and so I realizing that was kind of it makes you reevaluate stuff. And so I think hearing about the planning of who's coming to whose house, that was a moment. That was one moment where I started to look at things. But I think, like my mom said, the biggest moment is probably when Andrew Richardson encouraged her to stay with my former stepdad, um, after being after he physically hurt her, attacked her. And I don't know if my mom mentioned this, but he came up to me after my mom talked to him about it. He talked to me about, hey, is this okay? And I said, no, it's not okay. And um, I also mentioned to him that my former stepdad had substance abuse issues, and that I think were getting exacerbated because going into this Christ Church environment, like for me, I was not gonna underage drink. I didn't really worry about that. For him, a recovering alcoholic and user of narcotics, everybody was using, and I mean, he recognized it. He said that he actually pointed that out. Like this abusive alcoholic said, this is unhealthy, and so
Hmm.
that and so when I told all this stuff to Christian, he said okay, and then encouraged them. And his mentality was very much, I'll fix this marriage no matter what. And that is kind of the culture there too. Is there's very much a culture of fix marriages, both fix people into marriages and also fix marriages that probably should be reevaluated. Like, my mom is the only person who's had an abusive husband at this church. She's not the only one who's come forward to the leadership saying, "Hey, I need help," and she's not the only person who's basically been told to stay in her marriage. She's just the first person to actually leave.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it could be, as you know, it could be really difficult to leave this environment, and especially so for women, because they're generally not encouraged to be career-minded or independent. Definitely much to be encouraged to be under a man. And so when you have no real career prospects, no real backup plan, yeah, it's kind of easy for the church leadership to keep you with somebody who is abusive.
Mm-hmm.
And we've also talked about too, and I'm sure you saw this, and I'll ask you, it's they're worried that if maybe I'll pitch this question, have and I don't want to lead you into this question necessarily, but did you see pastors or the church leadership in general try to keep some of these marriages afloat as like the best way we can describe it is like an advertisement for the church. If you come here, these are the kinds of marriages that you can have. These are the kinds of families that you can have. This is the kind of environment that you can have. And if marriages aren't going well in the church, it's not a great billboard for the church. It's if I go here, I want to know that things will go better for me, not worse.
Definitely. I would say that's a big part of it. I know only because I was there for so long and got to know so much, is that one of the elders of the church had an issue with their family where one of their sons was abusing the other son, and they just sent the other son to live away. It was actually so bad that DCS got involved, and I only bringing this up because later on when I would meet with them I was while in the process of being kicked out of the church, I asked him point blank because they were telling me they needed me to publicly apologize to my former stepsister, uh, and I point blank asked him, "Would you force your son to apologize to your other son who was abusive?" And he said no, which like out literally said that he would not make his own kids do what he was making me do. Um, and so he immediately said, "No, actually, wait, that was what I meant." But he spoke from the heart for just a second, and so he admitted that he knew what he was asking me to do wasn't right, and he still asked me to do it. But going back to what you said about families, I saw a lot of relationships be forced. I saw people who were thinking about leaving their relationships, their marriages that were unhealthy, shamed out of it. There's a massive culture of gossip at this church. I don't know how it is at other CRC churches, but this church had a massive gossip issue stemming from the wives of the leadership. As someone who was in the kitchens when their cooking was being done, there was a massive culture of gossip that ended up it was so bad that the pastors had to make announcements about not gossiping publicly because everyone was aware of this gossip chain. And so there was a lot of, if you are this cause of a marriage, sorry, if you're thinking about ending a marriage or leaving a marriage, there's gossip about negative gossip. I had a former friend who was dating this girl at the church. She was encouraged to, that they met through a Bible study and church service. Actually, broke off the relationship and was then encouraged by the pastor Richardson to go back into that relationship, and now they're married. And so, like, I saw that of, like I said, fixing marriages. I had a friend who was different former friend, who had a full ride scholarship to a 4 university, very prestigious one here in Southern California, and was encouraged to drop out so that he could get a real man's job in construction where he works minimum wage and get married. And he would be graduating this June with really exciting career prospects if he had not dropped out. With zero debt, which is a big thing for going to university.
Yeah, especially
And
that university that you told me about before. That's
yeah,
not a cheap university.
not at all. That's why it was so awful. Like he left, and so I think that there is a level where they want you to get married if you're a young man or a young woman. They want you to get married. If you're a young woman, but I'm at also a really well-known school, and one of the other older girls from the church went there, got a degree in biology, and so a bachelor's of science in biology from the school I went to. That's a big career starter. And when she left school, they encouraged her to go work at the local CREC school. I think it's this I forget the name, the acronym for the CREC affiliated Christian schools.
ACCS.
Yeah, it's the local ACCS school in my city. She worked there as a teacher, and there's a lot of people who I know work at that school, specifically women who are married who work at that school, who are so qualified to teach anywhere else. And while they really going to do that is because they love their students and they love teaching, and to them that's way more valuable than any money. It does keep them dependent, and I think that's a lot of they're using things that could be beautiful, like an amazing church community, marriages, families, kids. Those are all beautiful things. But there's a lot of using beautiful things to keep people dependent. And that was one thing that actually happens to I've had friends, because when I went to the local ACCS school, I was the only male student in my grade level who was going to Christ Church. And after they graduated, a lot of them who were local ended up going to Christ Church. And I watched them pull away from their non-Christ Church communities, because when there's 2 to 3 events every week, and you're a full-time college student, maybe you're also working a job, you can only go to so many events, and you're heavily encouraged to ditch other events to go to these Christ Church events. And so there's a lot of these college students and also young adults who maybe just got out of college and don't have a lot of free time because they're starting their career. They're living alone for the first time. Are basically slowly but surely to the point where their only community is Christ Church. And I personally have been told by my current friends from my school that they never really got to know me until I got kicked out of Christ Church, because then I actually had the ability to go get to know them. And so I think that's a warning for young people, especially young men, is that, like, make sure that you're not being drawn in to the point where you're it's like one of the classic signs of an abusive relationship is when your partner is telling you to pull away from your community. That's like textbook abuse 101 is being pulled away from your community. Love bombing. Like, I hate to compare the church to an abusive partner, but if there's love bombing, there's pulling you away. There's also, while we are all everyone is with no one is without sin, right? There's a lot of shaming that happens to people, and I have personally experienced where when a member of Christ Church is disciplined at the ACCS school, the church leadership tells the school they will handle the discipline, and does. Obviously, it was not handled properly, and it gets out of control. And recently, one of the pastor's children was expelled from the local ACSS school for bullying, specifically involving sexual harassment. And that's why I'm sure there were some signs, there were some issues. but the church wanted to deal with it, and so that happened. They're expelled, and I've noticed that too. Is there's a lot of people who should have been set up for success aren't successful. Like I said, the person who went to my school, the young woman, is married, and I'm sure she's been told that marriage is the end all be all, and so she thinks she succeeded. But she could have been set up for a different life path. Um, like I said, my friend who dropped out. Um, I have seen two of the pastor's children, elders' children, one's pastor, one's elder, drop out of their college, mid college, just drop out, stop going to college. And so there's kind of, uh, you you are being taken away from successful life paths. I will be one of the first people in my generation of young adults at the Christ Church, had I been there, to graduate with a 4-year degree. And a lot of the people who were going to college after me dropped out. I think there's one or two people who are still at their 4-year programs who, out of like the double digit amount of people who were going. And so I think that there is a lot of drawing people away, like I said, drawing people away from from a path that could set them up for success. Because, like I said, their definition of success is having a marriage and kids. I didn't say happy marriage. I said having a marriage and kids. That is the success. That is their mold that you must fit into. And if you disagree, as I was told by the leadership, clearly, this is not a paraphrasing, that there is no room at Christ Church for members of the church who disagree with the decisions made by the leadership. And so if you are in disagreement, you are not you shouldn't be there. You should only be there if you're willing to agree. You cannot push back. There is no discussion. There is no, hey, I don't think this is right. There is acceptance of what you're being told. And so while I think a lot of young men strive, they want to have a good marriage, they want to have kids, they want to have a family, right? That is for most of us, that is the goal. You're not going to find that at a for most of young men, you're not going to find that at Christ Church, at a CREC church, because you might find a marriage, you might find family, but it will not be happy. You're going to be rushed into relationships before you get to know the other person. You're going even when you do get to know the person and you choose to break off the relationship, you will be encouraged to get back. And I think that for parents who's worried about their kids also growing up in this environment, it doesn't matter what you say, because the church leadership is the supreme authority. And so even though it's one of the 10 commandments, honor your mother and father, members of the church, young adults, are told to prioritize the church over their own family. And if you give your child, if you were given advice, like my mom was giving me advice, give me valuable life advice that has gotten me to where I am today, gotten me to the success I'm experiencing in my life. That's only because I chose not to listen to the leadership and listen to my mom instead. But most people no one's encouraged to do that. No one's encouraged to listen to their parents over the leadership. And so it's very, to me, that is the quintessential cult likeness, is the no room for dissent, because all the other factors compound that. But at the end of the day, if you aren't allowed to disagree with the leadership, then it is a cult, because there has to be left right bounds on what your pastor can tell you what to do.
Yeah, that's all really, really, really good. You have said that you were kicked out. So a young man was kicked out of his church. Why were you kicked out of Christ Church? Was it because of your questioning? Was it because of your mom? Was it because of what was happening there? Was it yes to all the above? Well, what happened when you started questioning? the elders of this church, and what led to your excommunication and being kicked out of Christ Church.
Yeah. So I'll first give you the reasons that the leadership gave, the reasons that I was told, and then I'll say what really caused it. So the real reason is my former stepsister was issued a no contact order to not approach my younger sister due to abuse, specifically abuse of a child, right? And so when we let the church leadership know, they said she is still allowed to come to the church. And unfortunately, or fortunately, I guess depending on how you look at it, due to the First Amendment, or restraining orders, no contact orders aren't actually legally enforceable on church property during church events. We learned that the hard way. But
Yeah.
that's a detail that I suggest every person out there who has one of those orders and is going to a CREC church, look into that, because you could have the person you have a restraining order come to your service, and if they were invited there by the leadership, that is not a restraining order violation. So I think that's valuable information that more people should know. But I told her, I tried to hand my ex stepsister the court order and say, you can't be here around my little sister. And then I learned is that the leadership had called the local sheriff's department to try to warn them to not come if we called about their order violation. And so they told my former stepsister that while with me present. So I learned that was also valuable information if you're attending a CREC church, is they will literally call the police and tell them not to come if there's potential abuse. And so when that happened, I was pulled aside by a member of the leadership and basically told, you can't do that. We said she could be here, and so she can be here. And I said, no. And then I was told I was not allowed to attend any further church events until I agreed to their demands, which were to apologize publicly to the leadership for defying them, apologize publicly to my former stepsister, who was abusive to me and my little sister, for trying to serve her the court documents to tell her she could not come. The exact phrasing was making her feel unwelcome. But given as my goal was to make her feel unwelcome, I wasn't sorry. And I told that. I said that I cannot be sorry. I can't be sorry
for laughing. I'm not thinking this is funny. It's just like
it's ridiculous.
It's so ridiculous. It's comedic.
It is absurd. It is absurd. You cannot make this up. It is an absurd that I made her feel unwelcome, and so therefore I should publicly apologize to her. And for context, this public apology would have been recorded along with other church live streams, because it would have been before church service during the announcement section. So it would have been recorded on YouTube with all other church events. And given that there was a restraining order court battle going on with her father and myself, as well as other people, that would have been used in court to try to dismiss the domestic violence restraining order. And he was aware of that. And this was not the first time. There had been an earlier situation, which I'll talk about when I talk about the real reasons I think I was told to leave. I was kicked out. But I went to my meetings with the leadership. That was when one of the elders told me that he wouldn't make his own son apologize to his abuser, but he would make me. And eventually it was apologize and commit to not making my ex stepsister feel unwelcome or never come to another event again. And I was not sorry. I wanted her to feel very unwelcome. And I also had to agree to not to talk about any situation. So I could not talk about the abuse. I could not let parents of young children know that the person they were asking to babysit their kids was issued a no contact order for child abuse. I couldn't say that. That was against what they wanted me to do. And so there was these ridiculous demands. I left and I said, no, thank you. I will not come back to events. I never revoked my membership, but they revoked it on the basis of me no longer attending church events because I was not allowed to attend them. But the real reason was way back in June of 2022, when my former stepfather called the police and told them he was going to murder my mother and himself.
Yep, we have the audio in this interview. Yep.
Yep. When that happened, I was actually about to go off to a special military language program for months. So I left right after that happened. And so I reached out to the pastor saying, hey, I think that we should talk about, boundaries and stuff like that. And at the time, my former stepsister had been kicked out of the house for being abusive, using drugs, and generally being an awful person. So she was actually not living with us at the time because there was marijuana around a young child, abuse of the young child. She went to this pastor, and he decided that she would be their pet project almost. And so all this happened, and I reached out to him, and I was basically ghosted. And so that all happened, and then I got back. I started attending services, but my mother and younger sister did not attend service with me because my former stepsister, who was abusive, was there, and so we attended on Wednesday nights only instead, just because my former stepsister wasn't there. She was too busy working at our bank because she got a job at our bank while all this happened, and so my former stepsisters and I had an issue where we were all going to the young adults Bible study dinner, and I made an offhand comment about how my former stepdad was using meth, and the meth was and he was tested positive for drugs while he was in rehab after calling the police and all that. And so I made a joke about how drugs can drive you to be a bad person. And so my former stepsisters felt very offended. I believe it's because my former sister was using drugs as well. So if using drugs could drive you to be a bad person, maybe she was being driven to a bad person. But I never found out, because she went straight to the pastor and made a complaint and asked to mediate with me. And so he asked if I would sit down and have a counseling with him and my two stepsisters the day before a court date, in which one of those sisters maybe was testifying against me. And he knew that. And so that was one source of conflict. Another source of conflict was that he told the DCFS worker assigned to the abuse case that he saw no issues. Just a reminder, at this time, he knew that my former stepfather had been physically attacked my mom, me, my sisters. He was aware that he had told the police he was going to murder my mom and himself. He was aware of all this, and he still told DCFS that he saw no concerns with my former stepfather having custody and visitation with my younger sister. I'm thankful that the courts disagreed with him, but he went out of his way to contact the caseworker and interfere. Which is just another example of how cult-like the church was, is that they will interfere in DCFS investigations because they need that control. And so that was just, at that point, I felt unsafe at the church, and so I stopped attending Sunday services just because I felt uncertain and unsafe. But then I started going again because I was invited back by friends, and at that point, the case had been resolved, and I thought that given this no contact order that had come out, and other situations, it wouldn't be a problem because there was a restraining order and a contact order. But it became a problem and I was removed. I think the reason I was kicked out is because I was not going to. I was clear that I was not going to get married anytime soon because I wanted to at least graduate college before I got married, and had kids, for the obvious reason. I'm joining the military, so I would have been moving away. It would not make sense to get married and then immediately move with a new family to another place and then move again. And so I said, I'm not ready for that. And I would have caused problems for my former stepsisters trying to get married because I knew, quote unquote, the dirt on the situation. And so had one of my friends said, "Oh, I'm dating this person," I would have said, "Oh, here's court documents explaining why you should not be dating this person and have kids with this person." And so I was a threat to marriages. I was a threat to their fake community. And I was a threat to I was a threat to the church because I was aware of this information and I kind of had nothing to lose in the case that by this point, I wasn't really that invested in the community anymore. And they knew that I was not afraid to speak about it. I mean, that was why one of their stipulations was that I wasn't allowed to discuss the situation with any members of the church because they didn't want me to expose the dirt. And I think that is one of the scariest things is that I don't know who's had to make decisions, right? Who's had to agree to not talk publicly about situations. Um, uh, I just I was basically removed because I knew too much, so to speak. I was aware of the problems, uh, and they had kind of lost their power over me by choosing to side with the opposite side of their restraining order and the domestic violence case, and that. And so, like I said, I think they realized I wasn't that invested. I wasn't subscribing to their mold. I was saying, I want to wait till I'm ready to get married. I want to wait till I'm ready to have kids. I want to wait till I'm in a place in my life. And I'm not going to destroy my own life to rush to that spot. Like my friends who were encouraged to drop out of school to be in a position where they could get married, right? So I was very much not subscribing to their mold, and either you subscribe to their mold and squeeze yourself in no matter how much it hurts, or you are kicked out.
There you go. So you were you were kicked out. You got out, which, as you said, thank the good Lord that you're out
Exactly.
of Christ Church. Um, Not the way that people want to be out, but shoot, this is good now.
I'm
So
glad, and I'm ultimately glad I was kicked out because I was 1 foot in, 1 foot out, right? Like I wasn't attending services because I loved the model services they were doing. I was attending services because that's where my friends were, and it was really hard to, in your third year of university, go make new friends like that.
yeah.
I had to eventually, but that's a difficult thing. No one wants to be forced out of their community. No one really wants to leave their community, leave those friendships behind. Um, and I was so stuck that I had to be forced out. And when someone has, I mean, right now I think I was an idiot. I was crazy. That even with how much I'd gone through, how much I knew, how many problems I was aware of, how much like dirt I was aware of, right? How much of the negativity I was exposed to, and I still wanted to be there. Just it's scary to think there was that much of a hold over me that was had.
Yeah, like we said before, it has happened to everyone. Young men, young women, old men, old women. It is they hold on you, on me, on everybody else. It doesn't matter who. So you've got out. We've talked about a lot. If you can, we talked to your mom about three groups. She added one for those who love this community and don't want to get out. And I want to ask you, since you're a young man and you are their target. There's no other way to put it other than they're looking for late teens, early 20s men who can just buy into the Kool-Aid, who just drink everything, who want, I mean, literally and figuratively. Um, this is where the anon accounts come from. This is where the red pilling comes from. This is where they're building their army, so to speak, literally and figuratively. So can you can you talk to young dudes out there who are looking like you said, who are looking whether they have a father figure or not. They're looking for some strength. They're looking for a male presence. They're looking for friends. They're looking for like-minded guys, and they're trying to figure out their way. They're trying to figure out, who am I? What am I doing? What does it mean to be a man? And you're looking for some sort of model. So talk to those who are listening, and also talk to the parents who are listening, who have kids, who have young men your age too.
Yeah. Um, I will I'd like to first talk about, you mentioned Red Pill and those movements. So it's
Yep.
really social media online movements. And I'd like to say that Christchurch is part of that problem. They're pushing people into marriages that aren't going to work out. And when you hear from those men who are divorced after years of marriage, and it was a bad marriage, a bad experience, that they regretted being married, though that's where you will be in a couple of decades, because this doesn't encourage healthy marriages. It encourages marriage at all costs, and marriage at all costs is a bad way. It's a bad thing. Is marriage at all costs? It's not a good philosophy. And so for parents, the same thing. It's marriage at all costs. The young men are not encouraged to encourage discretion, and they're encouraged, push into relationships, push into marriages. They happen fast. And dating culture right now for young people is awful. But it's also awful at these churches, and it's awful in a different way. It's so cliquey. There's so much gossip. If you go on a date with a girl from Christchurch, all the girls in the entire church will know exactly what happened on your date within a week. And so it's the community is real. It is a community. There is a community that they've created at these churches, and when you start going, you will feel so welcome. You will feel like everybody wants you there, because they do want you there. They genuinely want you there, but they want you there so they can use you, right? They want you there so that they can make you into a poster child for what they can do for other young people, so they can bring more people in there. And it's the friendships are real, because while at the top they have those spreadsheets, they have the plans on how they're going to do hospitality. The other young men, they're all just there too, and so the friendships are going to be real. The community is going to, there's a real element to it, and so it's going to feel real. But at the end of the day, you are the product, right? If you are the product, they're selling you a product, and the product is the other young people who have gone before, and they're setting you up to be the next product. And for parents of young people, it's your kids are the products. Your kids are they want them to be used. They want them to use them. And so, and it's hard to find a good, solid, family-oriented culture. It's very difficult to find a group of people who are family-oriented, who want to support you. And that's true. But you don't want to have to settle for a bad community, one that's going to end up getting hurt, right? Just because it's hard to find a good community doesn't mean you should decide to join one that's going to end up hurting you in the long run. It's worth putting in that much more effort. Just like when you work out, you have to experience pain to develop progress, to get stronger, to get faster. You're going to have to put in work to find a good community. And it's just, these churches aren't it.
Next, from the woman and her son, to a former deacon of Christ Church in Santa Clarita, who witnessed the meetings talked about and consistently and fervently advocated for both, principally for the little girl who was abused. Let's talk to him next.
Yeah, I knew nothing about the CREC or anybody in it, but we were a church plant here in Santa Clarita, and our family was asked to be part of it, and we joined it. welcoming and wanting to do this great work. I had to trust the previous pastor, the person who founded the church, that he'd done his homework on this denomination. And I never really pursued anything about it or learned anything about it. But fast forward, he moved on, and they brought in this, they didn't bring in anybody from the outside. They brought in the associate / music minister and asked him to take over. And I'd known him for years, and I thought I knew him, but it was obvious I really didn't. So how I got involved in this whole situation with this woman and her daughter is I was essentially replacing the pastor on the Department of Child and Family Services team to be a support team as a member of the church. Because as you know from the previous podcast, this estranged husband had called me at a 911 call on a weeknight and said he was going to murder his wife and then himself, and there were children in the home at that time.
Yeah, we had that audio in the interview too.
Yeah. So what caused me to be involved and get concerned was the way it was being handled by the senior pastor, the man now in charge at Christ Church Santa Clarita, this guy named Richardson. And the first thing that caused me concern was in early June, while this man was just coming out of a psych hospital evaluation, he sent a letter to the woman and said he wanted her to do this book on humility and continue almost as if this event had never happened, trying to do counseling to her without addressing this deep issue. But what raised the specter and the issue was when this same guy Richardson was interviewed by DCFS, and he told them in an interview that he had absolutely no problem with the father being around this daughter, even though it would he threatened to murder. And DCFS, all their antenna went up and said, we can't have this person around. So I essentially was his replacement as a representative of the church. So in summary, he was fired by Department of Child and Family Services, and I took his spot. And I made it very clear that to everyone in leadership, that I was there for this child. This child was in a precarious situation, and it was very dangerous. So, eventually he filed for divorce. A domestic violence restraining order was issued against him, which has subsequently been extended through 2028. He's such a bad person. And it came out during the course of the DCFS meetings, which I sat in on, that the little girl was divulging that she'd been abused by her father and her older stepsister. And this came out in the fall of that same year. And I notified the leadership, and they said, we're not going to do anything about it at all. And my concerns just grew deeper and deeper as the more we got into this. So, and at that point, the woman was told by DCFS to make sure that this abused daughter had no contact with the stepdaughter as a precaution until they finished their report. So I continued with these meetings. I continued meeting periodically with the DCFS team and the therapist that was assigned to the little girl. We were all on joint calls, and we're hearing about these horrible treatment of this little girl by the father and the stepsister. And it kept getting worse and worse. And then finally, DCFS issued their final report, and it is a public document. And I don't know how it can be done, but I think you have a copy.
Yeah, we do have copies of all the documents. Yep.
It is a public document, and I would encourage anybody listening to this podcast to reach out to you and ask for a copy of it. It's still posted on the website at Department of Child and Family Services of California. clearly states in there that the child was subjected to 20 counts of child abuse. And it states in that document that the step sister is to have no contact with the little girl. And then they also issued an additional court order against this step sister, saying that she can have no contact with her. And again, 20 counts of child abuse. And these are the ones that met the legal requirement in California. California has 3 categories of child abuse: verbal, emotional, number 2, physical, and number 3, sexual. I cannot say anything except between the two of them, it's the worst I've ever seen. It's the worst I've ever seen. This document was shared with the leadership, and this older stepsister was still attending the church because the woman was barred with her daughter from attending until this was resolved. Remember all that? And they decided that they were going to not touch it. They were going to ignore it. They went further to say that they confronted the stepsister, and she denied it, and they washed their hands of it. That was the end of the subject. The DCFS order was useless in their sight. They were above the law of California. And I just found that unconscionable, just unconscionable. So what happened is the woman felt that she had the right to go to church in light of this court order. She attended a church on a Sunday with her daughter. And I told the stepsister that if she attended the church because this little girl was inside with her mother, that the mother would be obligated to call the sheriff and make a report. And the church immediately said, "You can't do that. She's welcome." So later that Sunday, the sheriff came out and made a report. And I was there when the sheriff arrived. And I made sure that it was off the campus where they rent the church property, and met in the street. And a report was made and filed. So within a month of being given a no contact order, she'd already violated it, the stepsister. But the church just kept digging in their heels, doubling down, tripling down. And the woman was sent a letter stating that she had to apologize. The mother had to apologize to this stepsister for what she did. Just let that sink in for a second.
So what you're saying is the woman who I interviewed had to apologize to her stepdaughter, that like ex-stepdaughter now, whom was abusing this woman's daughter.
Correct. It's in writing. It's a letter. You will apologize to her. They sent a letter to the woman's son saying he had to do the same thing. Yep. And they sent an email to me asking me not to come back to church till I would meet with them. And I replied, I said, "I'm happy to meet with you, but I can't meet before Sunday." So the following Sunday, I showed up at church like I normally do. And that particular weekend, I had guests with me from out of town. And as I got out of the car, I was approached by 2 of the men of the church, a guy named Anderson and a guy named Selby. And they told me this exact words: "We've been deputized and you're not allowed to go into church." I said, "What?" I said, "You're not going in." I said, "What are you talking about?" He goes, "We are here to tell you we're not going to let you go into the church." Now, I didn't want any violence or any altercation further. And I said, "Well, I need to go get my wife." And they said, "You're not going in, we'll get her." I said, "I want to see my wife now." So the Anderson guy walked in and said, "Your husband wants to see you in the parking lot? Well, he can come and see me." "No, he needs to see you in the parking lot right now." And I told her what had happened. And I left our guest with some friends to drive to our house after the church service. And we immediately got in the car and drove to the new church where we're members. And we're just so glad we did. I couldn't believe the difference even in the first day. I think the word that I will continue to use is there's no shepherding at Christ Church. Right? I don't think there's any shepherding in the CREC. Men are called to be shepherds. And Jesus said, suffer the little children to come unto me. And not this little child, because at this church, and I think it's endemic in the CREC, the byword is obedience, that you will obey. It's top down. Whatever says goes. And I think that goes all the way back up to the very top up in Idaho. It's just systemic in the church. But again, the word here is absolutely no shepherding for this woman or this little girl, 0. And I still remember that day that she was in the church and hadn't been there in months. And how happy she was to see friends she hadn't seen in months and to play with them and to be happy. And I'll never forget that. And they took it away from her. And it's unconscionable. It's unconscionable. And so Richardson and Fudge, the 2 pastors there, they own this. And they're not people for which I have any respect at all. Not at all. And the leadership that decided to follow in their footsteps. As I said, we've been deputized. Where's that in the Bible?
Yeah. I'm just going to ask a few questions to conclude this. First, I have to ask, and I've talked to the woman and I've talked to her son about this. Why did the church leadership discipline her instead of the stepdaughter who was the offending party in every single way when it came to abuse, and also the ex-husband as well? Why did the blame land on this woman that we talked to, this woman whom all this stuff happened to?
They've never given me an answer. I can only speculate, and I don't want to go into that. I have my own opinions.
Yeah.
But I think it has to do with a woman's role in the CREC and how they're viewed. And I just feel that they are just non-shepherding. They're not men who belong in any place over people in a church. Not according to God's model. It is unconscionable the way they treated her and the little girl and everything all the way along. They should have been warmly welcomed. And as a separate thing, at the church we're currently members, there's another family who is equally ill-treated at this same church and left. And we sit and talk about her experience going through an abusive husband, divorce, and the fact that he was verbally abusing the 3 children. And there was no support. They just, well, you need to work it out and stay married and work it out. No. And she's so glad she got out of there as well. So, I know another family that left just because they couldn't deal with the woman was the primary driver. She goes, I can't live in a church like this anymore. So, but getting back to the woman and her daughter, a consistent pattern of no caring, no shepherding, not interested in the well-being of this child. And now she is divorced. It is finalized, thankfully. He's out of the picture. Mm-hmm. But even to add insult to injury, very recently, now, you keep in mind, I just told you that she was not allowed to return to this church until she apologized to the abuser, so she didn't come back. Well, guess what they did? They sent her a letter. Said, well, you haven't been in church in several months. We're going to take you off the membership rolls.
Yeah, we have that letter too.
Isn't that convenient? Isn't that convenient?
Yeah,
we set the bar. We give you an impossible task to do, and then we turn around and we'll say, we'll let you go.
Yeah.
So this abuser sits there every day, or when she comes, And I'll add another story to tell you how bad this stepdaughter is. When this woman and her husband were still married, of course, they were all living under the same roof. And the stepdaughter at that point was a young high school student. She was heavily involved in drugs and alcohol. And on two separate occasions, I brought it to their attention through people that I know at the entrance to the church, that on two separate occasions, within a month, this stepdaughter, who's the abusing one, they smelled pot on her coming into church. So she'd probably been toking up in a parking lot before she entered her home at her apartment. And I brought it to the leadership's attention. What did they do? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. And there are weaknesses in this church, and I think this part of the CREC's liberal use of alcohol is an issue.
Yep.
One of the leaders of the church had his son expelled from a private Christian school here in town a couple of years ago for drinking
Yep, we heard
alcohol.
that story.
And last year, 2 senior boys from the church were expelled permanently from the school for their actions. And one of them is the son of one of the 2 leaders in the church.
Mm-hmm.
And I still have contact with people in there. And when I told a couple of people about it just a few months ago, they didn't know anything about it. So it's obvious to me they kept it under wraps. But those are weaknesses and signs that show what's happening around here. And I am just concerned over, I don't know what, I think anyone who listens to this is in a serious church currently needs to do a real serious evaluation of their leadership and how they treat people, particularly women and children. And I sent a lot of documents even to the past or current head of the CREC with no action. They're not going to do anything.
No.
But, you know, to me, it's bad enough when a woman's being abused by her husband. When it starts dealing with children, that's a whole different decade. And I'm totally intolerant of anybody that will not come around a child and protect it in any way they can. Like I said, 20 counts that met the legal requirement of child abuse. I did nothing about it.
Yeah. So to end with all this in mind, and knowing this is the second to last interview of this episode, if you can speak directly to the pastor of Christ Church CREC in Santa Clarita, Richardson, if you could speak directly to him for what he has failed to do as a shepherd and what he's failed to do as a man in this congregation as well, protecting children. And then after that, if you can speak to the congregation at Christ Church in Santa Clarita, whether or not they know about this situation and what they should do or what they should know about this situation, about what really happened, because our assumption is they either don't know, are ignorant, or are brushing this under the rug. So if you can talk to both of those to end.
In my when we joined a new church, I sent the leadership, Richardson and Fudge and 2 other people, a letter. And it was basically a call to repentance. You need to acknowledge what you've done. You have aided and abetted the abuse of by not a child, in a sense, by not protecting her and letting this child come into a church that's warm and inviting. And it's the only church this little girl had known. She was baptized in this church. And just remember that to everybody's listening. And they barred her from coming. And it's just unconscionable, these actions. And to the people in the church that listen to it, listen to the entire tape or message. I think we're going to make available a link or a copy of the public DCFS document, final report, where this stepdaughter is mentioned and the 20 counts. And Do you want your children around a place like that? Do you want your children exposed to a young lady who's a known child abuser? Do you want her in your home? Hopefully not. But unfortunately, there's a couple of people in the church that I shared this with when I left, because we were founding members and they didn't care because it didn't affect them. And I think that's just almost just as bad, because again, it's a child. So when I said my exit letter was a call to repentance, and I wish they would. I wish they will. And I would call anybody that's in the CREC, and including this local church, to seriously reevaluate why you're there with your own children. And I really hope that people will look differently upon exactly what the role and leadership is and how much sway they have, and really make some changes if necessary. Because if you're going to stay in the CREC, you got three choices. You can accept it, you can change it and fight, or you can leave. And I simply pulled the sheets back and showed them exactly everything, and they didn't want to touch it, or they did touch it by not touching it. They're not going to go there. It's just really sad to think that people are not being led as shepherds should be. And that's what we have where I'm at right now. That became very obvious from day one. They get it. They understand that role. And it's really easy to submit to them rather than just being said, if you sit in a CRE church or this local one, your job is to obey. And I think that's what I learned from one of the new leaders that I supported coming in. And he said that in a meeting while I was leaving. And he said, well, there's one thing I've learned around this place is that my job is to obey. Well, show me that in the Bible. It's not there. We're all there to serve together. And it actually was a much better situation with the previous person. We had our faults, but it was much better. I don't think it would have turned out the same if he was still there.
Lastly, Ray Davis, the only one who will be named in this episode. He was an outside observer, a neutral third party who was brought into these meetings, who has experience in pastoral counseling, trauma-informed himself, and has a bit of history with some members of this family. Let's get to know him and what he saw. So we have witness number 2 for this woman's case at the Christ Church Santa Clarita, a CREC congregation in California. So if you can introduce yourself, you'd be the only one who's named in this episode, outside of those that were talking from church leadership from the CREC, which you were not part of. But if you can introduce yourself and how you got involved in this case in the first place.
Okay. Well, my name is Ray Davis, and I was a minister for another church in the town of Santa Clarita. I got to know this woman and her family because she started attending the church where I was working as a minister. But we weren't a very big church, so she was looking for a church that had a lot of family support. And that's how she ended up at Christ Church. And I would say initially she was very impressed with them and made a lot of friends. But then when this woman and her ex-husband began to have some problems, they both came to me for some counseling. So I counseled with them probably for at least 2 years, scattered, and with the ex-husband and 2 of his children, I worked with them as well. And it took a while for me to figure out what was going on. And I began to notice some things, particularly with her behavior. I remember telling her one time, you show the symptoms of a battered wife. And she was kind of shocked by that. And, but, as she chewed on it some more, she began to realize that she was a battered wife. Uh, and so, since she was going to Christ Church, I wasn't going to try to really interfere a whole lot. I just figured, let that church leadership handle some of those issues. But then from time to time, the woman would come to me uh, and start telling me some things that I just could not believe. Uh, she was telling me what the session, the pastor, associate pastor, and then the other lay member, the advice they were giving her, and I couldn't believe it. Then one day, she asked if the pastor could call me, and I said sure. So the pastor there at Christ Church called me, and we talked about this woman and her ex-husband and what was going on. And it was pretty evident to me that he had already made his mind up that the problem was with this woman, that she was egging her husband onto this. And again, that struck me kind of like crazy, which just told me that this pastor had not had either any training or much experience working with battered women, because it was pretty evident to me as time went on that's exactly what she was going through. Then things kind of escalated. Again, I kind of kept my distance, but I kept in contact with her and her son. And the daughter that was maltreated by one of the ex-husband's daughters, because I could just see she needed so much help and support. And again, the things she was telling me, I couldn't believe. In fact, at one time, the pastor before the current pastor at Christ Church had told her, because she had purchased a house on her own when she and her husband were separated. She put down the down payment. She was making all the mortgage payments. And that pastor told her that she was emasculating him, the ex-husband, because his name was not on the mortgage. And that's kind of how they had manipulated her to that point. Then came the incident where they had been going to court trying to get some restraining orders. The one against the ex-husband was fairly easy to get, but the one for the daughter, the ex-husband's daughter, that was a little more difficult. But again, they produced papers, they had witnesses, they had the daughter's therapist, and it again was pretty clear. And so they got that. And I guess I should preface too that I was on the safety team with that daughter. So, periodically we'd have meetings with therapists and social workers, so we could be kept abreast of what was actually happening and going on. But anyway, when they got that restraining order on that daughter, they thought they had won the battle and the family could return to Christ Church and feel safe. Well, the ex-husband's daughter came, and one of the deacons of the church at that time, and then the woman's son, they had approached her and said, "Hey, listen, you can't come here because we have this restraining order. And if you violate it, we have to notify the authorities." Well, that really created a big dust up with the session there at Christ Church. And so from that time on, I attended, I think, 3 meetings with the woman. with the session. I just went as kind of an observer, so kind of a more independent set of ears,
Third party observer. Yep.
third party. And I attended a session with her son, and then I attended 3 sessions with the deacon and his wife when they were going through this whole process. And that's when I really thought, wow, who's this session stuff? I mean, it was on the positive side, they were always willing to meet with this woman, the son, or this deacon. If any of the 3 would say, we got to talk, they would meet. And that looked pretty positive to me. But when we got into these meetings, they had already made up their minds. There was virtually no empathy for for the wife or the mother and the son and the deacon. They had sent all 3 of them a letter of what they had to do in order to be able to come back to Christ Church. And they never budged from that. They'd listen. I'll give them credit for that. They'd listen, but they would never budge. There was no empathy that I could tell. And again, the session honestly thought that this woman and her daughter should have no problems being in the same assembly as the daughter who had mistreated the other daughter. And I'm thinking to myself, you got to be kidding me. I mean, people go through trauma. Their solution to that was, well, let's bring the ex-husband's daughter into a meeting. We'll bring you into the meeting, and then you can make your accusations. We'll see what this ex-husband's daughter says in return, and we'll just settle this. Now, that's pretty naive when you have abusers and trauma. I mean, when people have trauma, I mean, it takes a while. You can't just put people in a room and say a prayer and presto, it's all done. But that was their approach. And I mean, there were times in these meetings, the mother just broke down in tears. I mean, she was just crushed because she was losing her social support of all her friends. And she had to apologize to the session. She had to apologize to her ex-husband's daughter who had abused her son and the younger daughter and had abused her. And then make some kind of apology to the entire congregation. Now, the woman made an apology to the session, just apologizing, I didn't know that you didn't want me to carry out this information about the restraining order directly to the girl. And so, I mean, it was a mess. And then in the meetings I had with the deacon, where I think the very first one, where they just told him he couldn't come back to church. His wife was sitting in there. She'd been quiet the whole time. And he left because he had a meeting. And then that deacon's wife began to sob because she said, I don't know what to do. The pastor put his arm around her and said, you can come to church, but your husband can't. And she said, how can I do that? I mean, we're husband and wife. Okay, what he did that you think is wrong, he was doing it for the sake of the younger daughter and for the sake of the Christ Church, so there wouldn't be a big blow up and having police show up and escorting this daughter away. And, as I was listening to the pastor talk to the deacon's wife, again, it appeared to me this guy has no counseling skill, no counseling knowledge, because there, again, wasn't any empathy. It was just, oh, yeah, you can come to church, but your husband can't. And I just left her in a quandary. And, she just didn't know what to do at that point in time. And so I just, that session, they have their rules, which they'll stick to, and the session is always right. And they were always pretty good at reminding all three of the people I've talked about, the wife, the son, and the deacon. When you came to join this church, you signed a covenant that you would obey the session. And there was never any any kind of inclination that perhaps they needed to change a bit. That's just, it didn't, that's just not what they do. And so, that's what I saw. I didn't want to jeopardize any of the three that were meeting with the session by offering my opinions. Again, I was there as a third party listening, but goodness, the thoughts that were going in my head when all of these meetings were going was just, these guys just don't know how to shepherd people who've gone through tragedy, who've gone through trauma. So I'd say that kind of sums it up from my point. Anyway.
Yeah. One little question to help end, just to be crystal clear, the only, I guess, discipline you saw coming from the session wasn't towards those who were accused of abusing. It was those who were on the abused side of the equation who were told, "Hey, you're in the wrong because you're pursuing these charges against them. You're pursuing this no contact order, this restraining order." Am I
Yeah.
catching this right?
Well, they did once the official paperwork went through for the no contact from the ex-husband. They seemed to hold that up, and they did ask that man not to come back to church. It was the ex-husband's daughter, and they believed her story that she had never abused her younger sister. And so they just said, hey, when it comes to trying to uphold this non contact between the ex husband's daughter and the younger daughter, I mean, we can't do anything. That was their, they just kind of, there's nothing we can do. Again, they believed her side of the story. They really had trouble understanding how somebody like that could do the things we know she did. And again, having sat in as a member of the safety committee for that girl, I'm aware of some things that happened. I wasn't free to talk about specifics. And the deacon was on that same committee, and we both assured the session what we know from the therapist is bad stuff. And you need to take this seriously. And you need to find some kind of professional help for the ex-husband's daughter. Because these things don't go away without some help. And so I know the deacon, he really pleaded with the session to find some way to help this ex-husband's daughter. And so as far as I know, they took no action against the ex-husband's daughter. They did ask that ex-husband not to come to Christ Church, but then once they were assured that the wife wasn't going to come back to Christ Church, and her son wasn't going to come back. Deacon wasn't going to come back. They actually let the ex-husband come and walk his other daughter down the aisle for her wedding. So, I mean, they just don't have any understanding, empathy for a battered woman or an abused young girl. They seem to be very in tune and almost defensive about men and their role. And I don't remember exactly, but it must have been about 3 to 4 months after we'd had those meetings with the session that they sent a letter both to the mother and to her son, giving a summary of what they thought the last meeting was. And basically that summary was, okay, we're in agreement that you'll be looking for another church. And that you've apologized to us and da 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 da. Well, that was far from what really happened. And so that kind of stirred up the nest again with the mother and her son. And I was kind of shocked. I just thought the session would lay low. As long as nobody hollered and screamed, let's just move on. And with that second letter, it was obvious that, at least in my opinion, as I read both letters written to the mom and the son, that they were just trying to cover their tracks, basically in their mind, saying, we've done everything we could and it's your fault, that you can't come back. And again, that shocked me that they would bring it up, and it shocked me particularly, in our first session meeting. I guess I forgot to mention this when I talked about this earlier. Before the mother had anything to say to the session, I gave the session my observations of the ex-husband's daughter. I had seen her be very, I'm going to just say, violent to the wife's son.
Mm-hmm.
This was at a birthday party that was held at the mother's house. And I saw this daughter they were on the trampoline, and I mean, she was pounding the son in the chest. And it kept going, so I could tell this was not just jesting or kind of some sibling teasing. I mean, she was hitting him hard enough to bruise him up. So there was obviously this anger that she had towards her stepbrother. And then again, in just dealing with them in the past, I know they had expressed to me some of their hostility they had to the mother and to the young daughters being present now that she was. And so I expressed that to the session, that even though this stepdaughter could be very calm in meeting, that there was another side to her when, for whatever reason, she chose not to like somebody. So I made that very clear. Again, it didn't surprise me that the session kind of poo-pooed that. And we just ended that first session with, okay, we're agreeing to disagree. And then when they sent that second letter, it's just like, why are you guys bringing this up again? And the only thing I could figure, they're just trying to cover whoever they had to answer to higher up in Christ Church. And I mean, all of this led me to some research about the headquarters there in Moscow, Idaho, which then I said, "Oh, I'm beginning to understand some of the stuff I'm seeing." Uh, and so, like I say, I'm dumbfounded by how the session handled this. Knowing what I know now about Moscow and the leader there, it makes sense. Doesn't make it right. And I don't know how you could claim to be a church that's following Jesus and have the positions that they do. I just know that they lean pretty heavily into young marriages and that the man is literally the head of the family, and like the man can do whatever he wants. The wife is supposed to submit regardless. Who cares about the line that Christ loved the church, that he gave himself up for her? As far as I can tell, they don't have any of that in their definition of a husband being the head of the household. So, uh, wow. So I can't recommend that church to anybody. In fact, anybody that would come in contact with what that was considering it, I would have to share my story. Now, I was in the meantime between the first session with the session and that second letter, I felt compelled to contact the denomination that actually owned the property that Christ Church was renting to kind of give them a bit of a warning.
Yeah, the Seventh-day Adventist one, right?
Yeah. And I wasn't going to mention who it was, but you have, so
I'll mention it.
but I did contact somebody who was in charge of the decision of renting, and I did talk to that individual, and I shared my concerns with him. And then he wanted me to write a letter, and he gave me who I needed to address it to and send it to, and I did that, but I never did hear anything from them. Uh, so I don't know what happened to the letter, how they responded to it, even if they got the letter. Because I guess looking back, maybe I should have sent it certified so I could have, proof that it was delivered to the person who needed to get it. But I did send it, and just left it with them. Again, the session, they can be pretty convincing, just like this wife's husband taken by himself could be very convincing, just like that husband's daughter could be very convincing. But again, my experience with people who abuse and protect abusers on their own, they can be very convincing. The ex-husband could be very convincing it was always the wife's fault for whatever happened. So this is just, for me, a very disturbing pattern that I see.
I want to thank the anonymous woman and her son, as well as a former deacon from Christ Church Santa Clarita, and Ray Davis for their time, vulnerability, and courage in speaking out about the abuse that was covered up and neglected at Christ Church Santa Clarita. Now a special message to the Seventh-day Adventist Church that rents their building to Christ Church. I hope you've been made aware of this episode and the tenants that you are renting to. I hope you will not only reconsider renting out to them, but cease renting out to Christ Church. You now know who you're renting to. Do you want to be associated with a church that has these issues rampant among their congregation? A church whose pastors care more about the abusers than those who are abused? A church that cares more about the obedience to leadership than faithfulness as shepherds? May the church be purified and the gospel of Christ magnified.